said in the registration for the project as a whole, we have been so fortunate to have over 50 people from across the country participate in this project over the course of the last 3 weeks. Our Information Services Working Group consisted of myself, Donna Bedry, who's a Public Services Manager with the Calgary Public Library, who's joined us on the webinar today, Carol Cooley, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Saskatoon Public Library, Kent Raymond, Manager of Service OPL with Ottawa Public Library, Meg Tangi-Matsos, who's the Branch Manager with Hamilton Public Library, who's also part of the webinar this afternoon, and Jennifer Weil, who's Manager of Information Services with the Surrey Libraries. So just as a bit of background, because I recognize that this is the first in a week-long series of webinars that we are doing to provide an opportunity for people to access the toolkit. The toolkit in and of itself is not a document where you're going to find all of the answers. As we all know, and as we're all living every day, the science and the practice of the COVID-19 response is just changing. And the right answer might look very different from one jurisdiction to another and from one library space to another. The goal for our toolkit team was really about making a toolkit that was practical, timely, and accessible, that it would be relevant to the widest possible audience of Canadian public libraries, and that by accessing the toolkit that you would feel confident that you were asking the right questions and considering all of the key issues. And as we always do so well in the public library community, we wanted to share the innovations that have been happening across the country in response to COVID-19. As part of our framework for developing the toolkit, we had guiding principles that will be of surprise to no one working in the public library realm. First and foremost, health and safety is at the forefront of what all of us are doing through this time, but we didn't want to forget some of our core values and wanted to ensure that they were also part of the conversation as we develop our next steps and look at the future of library service. So of course that includes the lens of inclusion and accessibility, the role of technology, the importance of our community, and the strong public organizations that we are in terms of working in diverse communities, be they rural, urban, across the country, with themes of reconciliation, environmental sustainability, innovation, and of course, financial stewardship moving forward. In terms of the toolkit overview, and as you'll know from looking at the CULC website, the toolkit in and of itself includes 7 discrete themed kits. And for the purpose of this afternoon, we're going to be focusing on the Information Services Toolkit. And for the purpose of information services, our working definition included reference, referral services, reader's advisory, technical help and instruction, and of course, customer service. You'll see this replicated over each of the toolkits, and they all consist of 4 core areas. Key considerations, which are the key questions that you want to be asking with regard to this particular topic area. Then we move forward to best and leading practices. And those will give you some tips and tricks, some resources to reach out to, and places to find more information around best and leading practices. And then stories from the field. So examples from our library community across Canada of how they have responded through the closure period and plans that they are making moving forward as we resume and look at reopening. And of course, additional resources. Just a disclaimer before we jump into the content of the session. Our expectation is that the use of this toolkit must be considered within your library's particular governance framework, be it provincial, territorial, regional, or municipal. And it needs to reflect the community of the library that you're serving. Nothing in this document constitutes legal advice, and all of the information that is not copyrighted may be adapted and shared for non-commercial purposes. But of course, attribution to CULC is always greatly appreciated. So when we thought about information services, we developed this core list of key considerations or questions. How can a library provide meaningful customer support and technology while maintaining physical distancing? How do you provide equitable access to information and those experiencing barriers to access? And some of those barriers that we're all well versed with, including social isolation, technology access, be it limitation of access to devices, Wi-Fi, or digital literacy knowledge. Language barriers, be they English as a second language or literacy levels, and of course, the accessibility barriers that we know many in our community face both digitally and within the built environment. How can you understand evolving community information needs and responding to them quickly? And I think that's all something that we've all been living over the course of the last 9 to 10 weeks. And importantly, how can we make sure that staff feel safe and prepared enough to give the best possible customer service as we move forward and re-enter our buildings and resume in-person services? And how can we provide user-centric service design as we reimagine what in-person library service will include? So it was really from those key considerations that we developed some of our best and leading practices. And for that, I will hand it over to Donna.
Good, thanks, Lita. So yes, as we're considering how we let people know and what information needs we address, I think one of the things that we think is very important is making sure that we raise awareness of the available services through a robust communication plan. It is, you know, the longstanding problem of public libraries is that people don't know what we do. And so it's important to engage your marketing department to make sure that they get that word out and make sure that they get that word out through all of the available platforms, both digital and non-digital, because not everyone has access to Facebook or Instagram or that kind of thing. And so publishing the information in local newsletters and that kind of thing. Making sure that we triage the services to make sure that we're focusing first on the services that are most needed, and making sure that we have an awareness of those, of our vulnerable populations as well. I think bullet 3 is the most important thing. One of them, besides keeping our staff and patrons safe and healthy, training staff before reopening on how to deliver exceptional information services from behind the mask, from behind the plexi screen, from 2 meters away, and making sure that they're aware of accessibility issues such as physical distancing and cloth masks impacting the ability for people who are deaf or hard of hearing and people who lip read. I think we've all been places in the last few weeks where we've had that exceptional service from behind the mask, where people are able to convey their warmth and welcome and interest in helping us. And I think we've all been places where it's been clear the person behind the mask or the plexiglass screen is terrified that we will communicate some dread disease to them. And so I think a training plan is absolutely critical for us to make sure that staff know how to ask people to distance from them, that they are comfortable doing that in a kind and welcoming way, and that staff understand this is a difficult time for everyone. And you know, there may be some patrons whose behavior is a little escalated because of that pressure that they're feeling. So that training is absolutely critical. The other thing that we absolutely need to do is leverage our social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, websites, web forms, blogs, other interfaces and software, like our ILS interface features like through BiblioCommons, to make sure that we can deliver readers advisory through curated lists and individualized service, but also through you know, Calgary Public Library has been doing an Instagram live session every week, I think, where people can have live advisory and ask questions in real time. On to the next screen. Okay, an important thing that we always do is the referral for our patrons onto good information sources, credible information sources. So it's important that we leverage our partnerships with local and other organizations to address social isolation. We can work with community partners to call out to people who we know are isolated. I know Saskatoon Public Library is doing this. I know that Calgary Public Library is calling out, has people calling out to our homebound readers. Also, make sure that we have the information and referral services to make sure that we can cover the service gaps. Make sure that we, community resources are easily findable for customers, available on the website, and make sure that we're meeting accessibility standards on the website, making sure that we have self-serve handouts that people can use. Find ways to serve customers having accessibility issues, and provide resource-specific staff training unique to our community's needs. Over to the next presenter.
Hi, that's me. I'm Jennifer. And I'm also controlling the slides, so you'll see my face looming because I'm afraid to turn off my video. I investigated technology with the group, and first of all, we would like to, echoing what Donna said, training and supporting staff in new technologies before we open is something that's going to help them deliver the best customer service, possible customer service, and also help them feel safe and prepared. We want to prepare for that rush of initial customers who need computers and who probably haven't had access to computers for quite some time. We want to be flexible and responsive with tech solutions. And by this we mean we may find a tech solution that we think works, we test it, we support our staff with it. This could easily change once we open, and maybe also preparing staff for the fact that we are dealing with an environment that's constantly changing, and our tech solutions might too, and we'll all be having some learning curves there. We'd like to collaborate to augment existing technology solutions and avoid duplicating work. We discuss collaboration a lot, and it's wonderful among libraries. We use our library partners, co-ops, consortia, etc. Provide simple instructions for e-resources or use vendors whenever possible. Again, not duplicating work. There could be handouts that could be given to or available for ready grab for the patrons to do certain things on the computers that we would normally need to stand next to them stand by them and help them with. And of course, we want to investigate best practices for customers with barriers to access. So thinking about things like web content accessibility guidelines, perhaps speaking with somebody who's an expert in accessibility and technology would be very useful. Oh, it's not advancing, 1 second. Oh, there it is. So another option is mirroring screens for computer assistance to info desk customers. You might have one behind the plexi, assuming you have plexi. You might also want one outside of the plexi so that people can see what you're doing, but from a comfortable distance, like Donna was discussing, that just the safe feeling for everybody and safety. Leverage your computer labs and use your projection screens for one-to-ones. It's the technologies there. Also, another technology already available is our Wi-Fi, and with limited capacity in the libraries, we'll want people to be able to access that as much as possible, and accessing it from outside the library is definitely a possibility. Lend devices, laptops, and data sticks. This is a big order, but we could leverage partnerships for that, and we could also help address the digital divide that's going to be continuing and possibly increasing as we can only allow a certain number of people into the library. Screen sharing for remote and in library support. Just to mention, when you look at the website under CULC Toolkit, we do have some specifics there, so I'm not going into specifics here. My text my slides are already fairly text heavy, but remember you can go back to that document and the CULC Toolkit website. Chatbots and AI for communication. So while we're screen sharing or while people are accessing our services remotely, it would be wonderful to have an option for them to communicate with us, similar to how many other, some libraries are doing now, and many customer service or service industries are already doing. And leverage our traditional virtual services. At Surrey, we have phone, we have email. We don't have chat and text, but we have been leveraging phone and email quite well, and we'll continue to do so when we open. Investigate a tech customer relationship management ticketing tool. We've all used these with our vendors, or many of us have. It's a way of triaging and communicating and supporting our customers. And again, there are specifics on the website. Consider bookable one-on-one sessions and a booking system for computer use. This doesn't have to be a radical technology solution. It could be a simple, phone in and schedule solution, but it will also help a little bit of cognitive control for those people who can't get in the library, but they really do want to find out when they will be able to access the services. This will help. Consider pre-recorded tutorials and webinars for tech assistants. Again, there might be some out there on, for example, toolshed.ca that you can leverage and use. Maybe not creating something that's already out there and sharing what you create with other libraries. Consider partnerships and digital assistance tutorials for government forms. This one's called out because we know government forms can be quite difficult to work with. And in addition, it's going to be even more difficult from a distance. So partnerships could help, documentation could help. Use ILS and other software to support fines and fee suspension, messaging on websites, alerts on BiblioCommons if you have BiblioCommons, and working with vendors to help with that. So I'm just going to breeze through the staff and public safety because I feel like this is going to be covered in almost every section and group that's presenting, and also the website has information as well. So we want to reduce touch points on technology. We want to possibly, consider a lot of personal protective equipment, and of course plexi, to allow closer interaction with customers, especially if we were outfitted with a lot of PPE. Recognize limited capacity may cause customer conflict. I know with info services and computers, there's a sense of urgency that patrons get, and this can lead to some conflict. So maybe if we have security, preparing them for that. Great communication and repeated communication in a number of forms about new cleaning protocols for staff, as well as safety requirements for the public. Set designated and/or assisted hours for vulnerable customers. Many services are already doing this, and it's quite successful. We could consider doing that as well. We need to see computer users a safe distance from each other. We may consider rotating out computers for use and then not for use. There are definitely a lot of considerations around that. And lastly, consider if staff can work remotely, and if this could work to open up more public space, as our capacity is going to be quite limited. So any way we can open up more space for the public will be beneficial. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Meg.
Hi, I'm Meg. The third section of all the toolkits is called Stories from the Field. And as Lita explained at the beginning, the stories are really examples of libraries that are doing interesting work in the area that our toolkit is focused on. This isn't meant to be an exhaustive list by any means. It really is what we could find while we were doing the research, which already seems like so long ago, just like a week ago. So there may be other libraries that are doing new and innovative things that may not appear in the lists. But we just wanted to kind of give you a snippet of some of the examples that we found. If you go to the toolkit, you'll be able to find links to tools and links to library websites as well that'll give you further information. So just touching on some points, a lot of libraries are offering traditional library services, but doing it virtually. So as Jen mentioned, via phone, email, and chat, and text reference as well. Other libraries are offering unique readers advisory experiences. So some examples would be Vaughan Public Library that's created a blog post around book recommendations based on zodiac signs, or Mississauga Library that's asking people through Instagram stories what they would like to read and then following up the next day with actual suggestions. Another interesting way of doing traditional services virtually is the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County that's offering a phone hotline for job seekers, as well as, and you'll see in the example picture here, the My Librarian service that's offering small business help and job help as well for their customers. Libraries are also developing and leveraging existing tools to help customers navigate their library resources. One example is UTM, the University of Toronto Mississauga, that's created resources based on the frequently asked questions that they get from their students and faculty. As well, libraries are leveraging collaborations and using their vendors to help them with existing guides or with creating help documentation and tutorials. Some examples of this would be the Niche Academy. They have a new section called Reopening Lives Collaboration, and that is a place where people are contributing with tutorials and ways to help customers navigate some of these resources. Another example of a collaboration is the Library Toolshed, and that's a bunch of libraries from Manitoba to BC that are working together to create some documentation and tutorials as well. Libraries are also working with local partners and community organizations to develop community resources that are then accessible to customers and frontline staff as well. Some examples of this are the Halton Community Service Directory, which is actually a collaboration between Oakville, Burlington, Milton, and Halton Hills Public Library. Hamilton Public Library offers the Red Book database, and Surrey Libraries, which is the next slide, Jen, has a patron searchable community resource site. All of these examples are providing resources to customers about community resources that are COVID specific. So things around how people could get government support, or how people can find mental health resources or food security resources within their community. So if you want to bounce to the next slide, that'll just show, that's just the Surrey Libraries website that gives you an example of what that kind of a resource list would look like. Libraries are also offering ESL services and continuing to do the work in other languages that they've always done before. Some examples around this, Hamilton Public Library is continuing to offer our newcomer services through online ESL tutoring. We've also partnered with McMaster students to offer a phoning service in multilingual languages, so that they're calling socially isolated seniors who do not speak English as their first language. Surrey Libraries is continuing to use their municipality's language translation services through their phone reference, and Toronto Public Library's Library Settlement Partnership has completely transitioned to remote access through phone, email, and web chat service. Libraries are also continuing to communicate with customers, but now those who are socially isolated. We've heard a lot about libraries that are calling their seniors. Fort Worth Library is an example of that, calling all of their customers that are over the age of 65. Those calls really do help staff to be able to then offer referral services, help folks with online resources. So it is another way to offer information services in this new environment. Toronto Public Library has printed resources that highlight essential services, and they're actually posting them on the doors at 42 of their branch locations. They've also created a new accessibility website that has new accessibility collections resources, as well as tips for getting access to those resources. Those libraries that are fortunate enough to be able to distribute technology in their community have been doing so. Calgary Public Library was able to distribute over 300 Chromebooks, and another 100 are waiting to go to various social agencies, 50 of which are designated specifically to be distributed to Indigenous users. Saskatoon Public Library was able to loan Chromebooks, Wi-Fi hotspots, and laptops to volunteers who are helping assist folks with government support programs and applications online. A few libraries are also trying to figure out ways to get library cards to new customers during this time. Burlington and Hamilton Public Library is using a company called Keepu, and that company allows you to do address verification online before offering the library card, which is also created online. And Surrey libraries have created an in-house model where they receive an email and then manually create the card. So it can be done in a couple of different ways. And then finally, libraries are offering remote printing solutions. Calgary Public Library uses Everyone Print, where customers can send a print job from home and then staff can print it out using a library barcode number. And Coquitlam Public Library is offering that a similar service, but using it via email. So those are just some examples of what's happening, the extraordinary work that's happening in libraries at this time. If you do go to the toolkit, you'll find more examples and then links as well, so that you can find more resources that way. The final section of all the toolkits is a resource section, and it's meant to be kind of a compilation of the resources that we found and used to create the toolkits, as well as further reading. So this is just an example on this slide of some of the resources that we used. You'll see a few that are about the customer service experience, which we spent a lot of time discussing as a group as well. And you'll also find, if you go to the toolkit, French language resources as well, which aren't listed on this slide here. So I'm going to throw it over to Lita, I believe, who's going to field some questions.
This was our first webinar in the series, and our hope was to leave some time for questions. So anything that people are working on from an information services standpoint that you're interested in having more information about. One question that has come up in the chat is just where to access the full toolkit. So many of you may have accessed the webinar through a email that was forwarded to you. So I'll just include the link for the full toolkit. When you go to the CULC website, the webinars are listed at the top of the page, and if you keep scrolling down the page, then you'll be able to access all of the links for the various pieces of the toolkit. But just wanted to open the room to questions in chat if anyone has anything that they're thinking about from an information services standpoint or more generally. So just seeing a question for using non-library staff, i.e. McMaster students, I think this is your example, Meg, to contact patrons. How is HPL handling patron safety and privacy?
So this is an opt-in. If there are customers that would like a callback, they actually opt into the program. So they actually provide that information to us when we're having other organizations such as McMaster do those calls on our behalf. So any recommendations to support folks for whom appointments, i.e. technology, outreach, support, etc., are a barrier because of barriers such as lack of technology, homelessness, addiction, and mental health? I know we had a few examples of that in a few pieces. Donna, I think Calgary Public Library is doing some partnerships with community agencies to try and make sure that your technology lending gets to the right hands.
Yes, the 400 Chromebooks that we've loaned out, we have loaned out through a single contact through the City of Calgary, who's making sure those laptops, those Chromebooks get to the various social agencies. You know, for people who don't otherwise have access to the technology, that's one way for them to get them. But, you know, I think it's just really important to be able to refer people on to the appropriate places that can help them at this time. It's important to have a really solid list of referrals.
Absolutely. So question coming in, recommendations to disinfect technology between patron use, providing materials for patrons versus having staff wipe down equipment. And I can start on that one, and if other people want to jump in, I think what we've seen and one of the fortunate pieces about being able to be part of this working group is just that we've been able to look at so many different sources, and it definitely seems that there's a lot of different approaches out there. I think one of the things that we consistently found is just to be clear in your communication. So whatever strategy seems to make the most sense for your library, to ensure that that's clearly communicated to staff as well as your customers. Some of the functionality, if you're at a library that has a computer management system in terms of booking time, looking at how you're scheduling your computers so that you can leave ample time for cleaning in between, if that's going to be a staff task. I know some libraries have looked at keyboard shields or pieces to put over keyboards, and just we're finding that that was making it more complicated. So there's a variety of disinfectant options that are out there, but you'll want to work with your municipality or your local public health authority in terms of what the acceptable use type products are in your area. I know for a lot of the planning that we're doing for Burlington Public Library, we're having a blend where there's a staff role, but we recognize for some of our customers that they feel best when they can do it themselves. So we're ensuring that there's also public stations available so that even if we have a staff protocol to wipe in between self-check units, for example, that the resources are available for customers to take that on themselves. Did anyone else want to add to anything around the technology wiping and cleaning and use?
Well, as with everything, I think the real solution is wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. But I know that Saskatoon was looking at trying to get some of those mobile hand washing stations and just making sure the hand sanitizer is available everywhere, that it's ubiquitous around the library, because, it's very hard to disinfect a keyboard.
Absolutely. Another question around screen monitoring options, and I'm just typing back in the chat that some of the specific links to software tools are included as part of the toolkit, but did anyone want to chime in with anything more around the software used for mirroring screens and that?
Yeah, I pulled it up on my screen here so I could list them. Some of the tools that are listed in the toolkit are AnyDesk, Zoho, and Apple Share Your Screen. Not sure how those work in tandem with the computer systems that a lot of libraries have, but those are some of the examples that were out there.
Any recommendations regarding whether to deliver online tech instruction via a recorded webinar or live? I think we found there was really a combination of both. Do you want to take that one, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think it would have to be a combination of both, and it would depend on the situation and the context. It's kind of a matter of assessing what kind of needs the person has and whether or not there's a webinar that would meet those needs. And because some people's some people's needs will be fairly complicated, and the screen share might not be the best way to meet them, especially if there's a low level of digital literacy. And that's where you can leverage, if you have a computer lab, a projection screen, or come up with a creative solution where you can be distanced from the person while giving instruction.
Just another question around information services interactions. We know that pre-COVID, many of our information services interactions would end with referral to a print resource, and any considerations in place for how to replicate print material, whether it be self-serve or staff mediated. I think some of the pieces that we talked about in terms of some of the customer management software tools that are out there is by what they allow you to do is create a session, which then allows you to push information out to that individual so that they have the links. Again, so much of what we have to be mindful of moving forward are the barriers for individuals who maybe do not have the access to the technology. But at least for the very early phases of reopening, limiting paper materials that are distributed on site is something that I think many libraries are recognizing that they'll have to do for a period. A question around if anyone was planning to limit access to computers by age, i.e. children, recognizing that we're going to have more limited computer capacity in the early phases in many cases. I don't think that was something that we encountered, but happy to open these questions up in the chat too. So if anyone participating on the call is planning to do so and wants to chime in, I'm happy to share that. So as we keep referring to throughout the conversation, a lot of what we're hoping to do with today's webinar is just to give people an introduction and an overview of the structure of the toolkits. One of the benefits that we've been able to do by putting this toolkit together in an online format is that the links are very much embedded throughout. So you'll notice as you work through the toolkit that the links are right there and will take you forward to the resources. We've also included for the Information Services Toolkit an additional resources folder. And when you click on that, you'll notice that it opens to an open Google Drive. And what we're hoping is that people will, if you have great resources that you're working on or that you've discovered that are publicly accessible around information services, that you'll upload some of that content to share with the wider public library community. One piece that we realized when we started doing this work was that for a lot of the existing resources that were out there, as important as information services is to the work that we do in the library, it wasn't a topic that was covered in a lot of detail in some of the other tools. So we hope that with some of these questions, we've started a jumping off point that people will continue to explore. Just had a few more questions chime in, so I will backtrack and try and capture those. You know, some people are definitely thinking about computer access. Question around where is the washroom? One of our favored and most common information services questions. Will many libraries be limiting access to public washrooms? I can start that one speaking for my own library, Burlington. In our early phases, when we look at holds pickup service, we will be restricting access to the washroom. The staff, public will not be able to go beyond a very controlled area to pick up the holds, but that's definitely something that we're considering going forward. In our case, we recognized an opportunity to retrofit some of our washrooms to do touchless flush and touchless sinks in some locations where we didn't have that. Again, just trying to reduce touch points and control for the enhanced cleaning that we're building into some of our processes. Did anyone else want to chime in on the where's the washroom question? I'm on the West Coast. Are there plans for washroom access?
No, we don't actually have any plans for that at our library yet that I know of. We're working, Surrey is working very closely with the municipality on their recommendations, and of course the BC recommendations for libraries, which came out last week. But interesting question. Something to think about. And yeah, when we do our phased recovery, I'm sure it will be one of the things we address. And this is where it's nice to info share along the way as much as possible.
So another question came in around computer questions from patrons. We know that so many of our questions were previously quick questions that we could solve in a minute, but involved relatively close contact. How to keep a physical distance and not make these interactions more complicated. And I know that was definitely an area of challenge that we thought about because we recognize how critical that proximity is to expediting some of those conversations. But did you want to chime in there, Meg?
I was just going to say one of the examples that we found in one of the American libraries was a simple laser pointer, so that you could stand a fair distance away but still use the pointer to show people on a screen what they needed to click on. You wouldn't be able to get up close to actually do the double clicking for them, which some of them need, but you'd be able to show them with a laser pointer.
And also I was thinking when we're using a technology such as screen sharing, I'm sure people have experienced this with their IT support, but often you have a way of communicating, a voice communication as well as the visual. I don't have the answers for that. I don't know if we can put a phone next to every computer, but it is something to consider when we're thinking about doing things remotely from a desk to a computer with a patron as well. If we're not in the same room with them and divided by plexi, maybe a phone or something that they can talk to us with.
I think also with adequate PPE, you can, you can approach patrons. We don't need to be 12 feet away or 6 feet away, or if we have the appropriate PPE on, the 2 meter distance is meant to indicate if you are not wearing appropriate PPE. So this is what I say, it'll be important to train our staff to make good judgments about that, to be comfortable saying, I can't get any closer to you than this, or I'm just going to come in for a moment and show you how to do something.
Another question added to the chat, when discussing whether to limit access, this particular library is talking about priority needs around people in applying for government services and so forth versus entertainment needs, and curious to get input from others about how or when libraries should be stepping in around content as it relates to computer access. I know some of the conversations that I've been a part of, we've thought more about just controlling through time, so that perhaps recognizing we would have less computer capacity, that we would be shortening the amount of time that customers could be using the computer for. But did anyone want to chime in around some more thoughts there?
Yeah, I was just thinking, it's a tough one because when we're trying to weigh or give a weight to what's more important, there could be people coming in to use social media who haven't been able to contact their family in quite some time. So triaging it that way, I think, is a very difficult proposition. But like Lita was saying, limiting time and doing it in other measures rather than a value judgment on what they're doing, because we don't really know their specific circumstances, I think is a good way to approach that.
Another question around recommendations for use of special collections, i.e. newspapers or microfilm, if there's any typically items that are typically used in-house. So again, I know for us at Burlington, because we know that it won't be until further along in our phasing structure that we'll have people in the library, we've actually suspended many of our in-house type subscriptions, just recognizing that they aren't going to be utilized. But I think those are the types of questions that really come to the fore when you really start to think about how people previously used library space as that third living room, as that community living room, and what the impacts are in how that space is configured, and how you handle some of those materials that, what by their very nature, were multi-touch items over the course of a general open day. Just an answer in the chat, library that's looking at offering washroom access, recognizing that there are very few public washrooms available in the community, and definitely that's been a concern as well. I know there are several libraries across the country that have worked with their municipality to act as sort of hygiene centers in some cases, or to make parking lots or spaces available for temporary washroom facilities, recognizing the significant barrier that's been for many communities. And one of those examples is VPL. So they are currently offering access to washrooms for vulnerable populations due to the lack of public washrooms in the downtown core. With regard to PPE, some of our population need to see facial cues and mouths for language and comfort. Our library is sourcing transparent masks. And the short answer to that is yes. I think there are many libraries that are looking at the face shield as a PPE resource, recognizing some of the accessibility barriers that a cloth mask presents in terms of those very issues that you highlight around facial cues and lip reading for comfort. To my knowledge, there is a cloth mask that has been produced and is promoted by the deaf and hard of hearing community, where there is a clear portion to the middle of the mask to allow for continued lip reading. I'm not aware of any of the any libraries that are actively using those, but they could be. A question: if anyone's considering a closed stacked model as an interim step once people are in the building, access to info staff and staff to retrieve print material. I know for Burlington Public Library, it won't be until our later phases that we'll be having customers enter the stock area, just recognizing with reduced occupancy, trying to control which parts of the branch that people are able to access. But I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in there. Yes, in terms of for the face shield, Carr McLean is providing PPE as well, including the face shield. Just have a library chiming in that they've been using the closed stacked model with library staff getting the books and that it's working well for them. Has anyone considered using a metered access model for the branch? So someone has answered back that in Vancouver, considering a phasing of the floors of the central library where staff would mediate access across the collections to start. Another library is looking at closed stacks in a later phase as an option. And recognition, I think that's something our team has come to see over the 2 short weeks that we've been working together on this, is that there really are no perfect solutions. And we are in the midst of an imperfect time. So at the core, what we're hoping that this toolkit provides for you is an opportunity to ask the questions, weigh the possible solutions, and implement some mitigation strategies to address some of the barriers that inevitably are going to be created by the difficult decisions that we're each making within our own institutions right now as we try and merge the needs of library service with what we need to do from a public health and safety standpoint around best practices for physical distancing and reducing spread. So I think that gets us very close to time. Thank you to everyone who made some time to jump on the webinar today. It's been a very quick process that we've been working through. I've been so fortunate to work with this great team pulling together these ideas, and we're really hopeful that you find these resources helpful and that you can carry them back to your library and that they can help be comfort for you as you're working through your decisions, knowing that, as always, as a library community, we're in this together.